In this example, we're going to show you how easily we can slice a model in the software out of a fairly thin piece of material with the intention of gluing the slices together to create one thick model. So let's just go to File, Close. So let's go and create a new file. So we're working with a single-sided job. The width of this is going to be 28 inches, height is 28 inches, and my material thickness is 1 inch. And this will be the same thickness that we will slice our model to. Z0 position of the material surface, XY datum position to the lower left-hand corner. We're going to work with a very high modelling resolution just to maximise the model quality here. Then we could go ahead and press OK. So to import a component or a 3D model, we come into the Modelling tab, use this icon here to import a component or a 3D model, where I can then browse my machine to search for 3D files. In the Slicing a 3D Model project folder, I'm going to open the Apple Edit.v3m, press open, and it will be sized and positioned according to how it was saved in the original file. So let's just bring that to the centre of our job. So we're going to use this icon here to align that. I'm going to align that to the centre both vertically and horizontally to our material. And we'll close that down. And then we'll come over and we'll look at tiling our windows so we can see both the 2D and the 3D view. So let's just increase the size of the apple. So with that selected, we're going to come over to Set Selected Object Size. Here we're going to just look at altering the height, where we're going to have Link XY checked, so it will scale the width in proportion to the new height that I enter in here. So I'm going to put in a height of 27, press apply, and you'll see that that's just increased that for me. Then we can close that down. I'm going to go into the Modelling tab, and now we're going to check the Z height of this apple. So into the properties, we can see the current shape height here is 3.6393. So let's just up that, we'll just round that up to a nice 3 3/4, and press spacebar to enter that in, and then we can close that down. So now that we have our apple sized and it's scaled in Z to 3 3/4 inches, we can now think about slicing the part into 1 inch slices. So with that selected, let's go over to Slice Visible Model into Component Slices. And so here we're displayed the model thickness, which is 3 3/4. The material thickness we're currently using is 1 inch. And then we have the option to choose our slice thickness, where we can input precise values in here, or we could specify the number of slices that we want to use. In this case, I want each one of my slices to be 1 inch. And so it's telling us that out of the overall model we're going to get 4 slices, and the top slice thickness is going to be 3/4 inch. So we're going to have 3 slices at 3 inches and 1 at the 3/4. Okay, we want to create vector boundaries around our components when it slices them, so I'm going to check that option, and that will be useful for me when I come to create my toolpaths. So let's go and slice the model. Okay, so you can see there it's slicing the model and it's including those vectors. And so we can see in the component tree we have our 4 slices here. I can actually take the original apple and I can delete that, as I don't need that. I am only interested in the sliced model. So I'm going to right click here, we're going to use the option to delete that. And you'll notice as well in our layer manager here, if I just click on that to open that up, we also have layers for each one of the slices where the vectors and the component grayscales have been added onto. So let's just take that layer and we're just going to delete that. That was the original apple layer. Now we've deleted that component, I can look at deleting this layer also. So we'll delete that. So we just have 4 slice layers and we have 4 slice components. So let's just go to the layer manager and we're just going to switch the visibility off all 3 slices apart from the top first slice. And we can see that we have a vector boundary that's been created around the actual 3D area of the slice. And if we go into our component tree, I'm just going to right click on slice 1, and then we're going to use the option show only this, and we can see the slice there in the 3D view. So we can see the 3D area on the side of our part, and then where it's been sliced. If I hover my mouse over this flat area, we can see highlighted at the bottom we have a Z height of 1 inch, because that's what we set our slice thickness to. If we turn slice 1 off and switch on slice 2, we'll go to the slice 2 layer again. It's created a vector boundary around the 3D areas, and again if I hover my mouse over the flat area in the 3D view, we have a Z value of 1 inch. If we switch off slice 2, I'm going to jump straight to slice 4, and then in our layer manager, let's open up slice 4 there, and you'll see here if I take that component, I'm going to go into the properties, and we've got a height of 3/4 of an inch. That's our last slice, and we've got one vector that represents the 3D there. So let's just switch everything back on, and we'll switch all of our layers back on. And so slicing the part in a job size that is a little bit bigger than our component has enabled us to maximise the model quality for each one of these slices. So now what we need to do is look at increasing our job size so that the size of our job will be the size of the actual material that we are using, and that way we can position all of these slices ready for machining. So let's go into the drawing tab. I'm going to go back into the set job dimensions and origin. So here we're going to put in a width of 48 and a height of 48 also, and everything else will remain the same. Then we could go ahead and press OK. So now what I'd like to do is move the entire model over to the lower left hand corner, but make sure that I have a 1 inch gap that surrounds the part to make it more appropriate for when I cut the part out. So I'm just going to box select. I'm just literally using my left mouse key to drag a box around our part so it selects all of the components and the vectors, and then I'm going to come over and use the move selected objects tool. So here we're going to put in an absolute value where we're going to anchor this from the lower left hand corner of our model, and we're going to position that to an absolute value of x1, y1, and then we could press apply, and that will just move that over for us. So essentially we have 1 inch space running on the left and a 1 inch space running underneath there. So let's just close that. So now we need to position all of the other slices. So essentially we've already moved the first bottom slice over to the lower left hand corner. Let's go to our layers tab. We're going to switch off slice 1, switch off 3, switch off 4. I'm going to make sure slice 2 is the active layer. We're going to look at moving slice 2. So I'm just going to box select the grayscale along with those vectors, and again we're going to look at moving this. This time we're going to move that over to the top right hand corner. So if we go back into the move selected objects form, I want to make the anchor point on the top right hand corner, so I'm going to select that option there so it moves about this point, and then we're going to put that in an absolute move where x is going to be 47 and y is going to be 47. Press apply, and we can see that that's moved that over to the top right. Now I'd like to rotate this, so let's just close out there. We're going to use the rotate selected objects tool. We're going to put the anchor point in the centre of the object, which is here, and we're just going to rotate that 90 degrees. Press apply. You can see it's done that there, but now my component is overhanging our job space. So we're just going to do one last move for that component. So we'll move that. Again, anchor point top right, and we're going to put that at 47, 47, apply that. So now we've got a nice 1 inch gap between the edge of our material and our component on both the top and the side here. Okay, so let's just close that down. And then we'll go to our layer manager. I'm going to switch on slice 3, make that the active layer, and I'm just going to box select everything and shift and select the component as well. And this time I'm just going to manually just move that over. So I'm just going to move that over like so, and then we'll just look at manually rotating that so it fits in position here. Okay, so something like that seems okay. And then we'll just make sure that we put it so we have a 1-inch gap around the corner here. So with that selected, let's go to Move Selected Objects. This time I'm going to make the anchor point in the lower right hand corner here. And we're going to move that to an absolute position where X is going to be 47 and Y is going to be 1. Press apply, and that will move that over with a nice 1-inch gap between the edge of our part and our component. Okay, so let's just close that down, and then we'll go to our layer manager. We'll switch on slice 1 and switch on slice 4, making that the active layer. I'm just going to select that component, shift and select the outline there, and then select that again to put it into transform mode, and we're just going to move that over like so. So there we've positioned all of the slices within our job space. Now there's a few things that we need to think about before we cut this out. Firstly is we're going to have to make some changes to the vector boundaries that we've got here. And that's so that we can choose appropriate vectors for the areas that we actually want to cut out, where we only want to limit the toolpath to only cut the 3D areas. So that's the 3D areas of our slices being the sides of the apple. We also need to think about how to hold the part down and the material that we're cutting this out of, and these sorts of things are going to present you with lots of choices to make if you are going to slice a part like this example. Now, one of the things that could be beneficial is to set up a toolpath just to mark the top of the material on the flat areas and then drill holes through it in order to hold these parts down. However, this isn't going to help you with this top piece here because you don't want to damage the top piece by drilling through it. Now, another thing that will provide you with some challenges when cutting a part like this out are the very thin areas such as the stalk and the top piece of the apple here. And so how you hold these parts in place and how you're going to get enough material as you start to rough, finish and cut the part needs a little bit of thinking. And there are a couple of approaches to this. You could add 3D tabs, which you would have to manually remove and clean up, or another way that we could add a hold down to everything, and it does have its negatives when we come to finishing, and that is to add a thin flat plane that merges through all of the components so that it will stop the roughing and finishing cutting all the way through the part. But it does mean that you will get a vertical lip all the way around the bottom of each side, which would need to be manually cleaned up. Now, for some material, this method is probably more favourable than trying to figure out how to hold everything in place, and so we'll use this in our example. But it is important to note that this may not be the most appropriate way of holding the parts down if you plan on doing something similar to this example. So to do this, we're going to add in a zero plane. So let's go into the modelling tab. We're going to use this icon here to add a plane component with 0 height, and that will cover our entire workspace. Okay, so we can see the zero plane has been added there. Okay, we can't see the actual grayscale. The grayscale gets added onto a layer that is defaulted to having the visibility switched off. Okay, so just click in the space there, but we can see our zero plane here in the 3D view. So the zero plane, let's go into the properties, and so we're going to set the combine mode of this to merge so it blends in with our components when we add this height. So I'm going to put in a very small height of 0.03, and so this will stop the tool cutting in to the last 30 thousandths of an inch. and so that it will leave some material to hold all of our slices in place. And then as we do the cutout, perhaps leaving some tabs in place, we'll be left with a lip of material that will need to be cleaned up. Okay, so let's just close that down. So now let's make some adjustments to our vector boundaries. So we'll maximise the 2D view. We'll use this option here to zoom to fit. Now each set of vectors was grouped and placed on a particular layer when we sliced the apple. Now I'm going to ungroup all of the vectors and regroup them into a specific order. So I'm just going to select this one, Shift and select this set of vectors, Shift and select this set of vectors, and then we're just going to press U on the keyboard, and that's going to ungroup them. So U is the keyboard shortcut key to ungroup objects. Okay, so now I'm going to look at selecting all of the outer vectors, and these outer vectors will represent the cutout boundaries for our profile toolpath. So let's just click into the white space. I'm going to select this vector here, Shift and select the outer one for slice 1, Shift and select this one, and Shift and select this one, and then I'm going to right click, and then we're going to use the option to group objects. And so now this just makes it easier for me to select the vectors when we come to run our toolpaths. So now I'm going to select all of the inner vectors, and we're going to look at grouping those, and these vectors represent the machine boundary for the flat areas. Now we're not actually cutting the flat areas, we're only cutting the sides where we have 3D, which leads me to my next task. We're going to take the vectors that represent the profile shapes, so the actual outlines of our parts, and we're going to look at offsetting them outwards slightly so that when we run the 3D toolpath to cut the 3D areas, the tool can roll past the edge of the model in order to cut the side of the part. So with those vectors selected, let's go over to the drawing tab. We're going to offset them, where we're going to offset them outwards by a small distance of 0.3. Okay, so that's a little larger than the radius of the tool that I plan to use. So I plan to use a 1/2 inch ball nose. I'm going to make sure that Create Sharp Offset Corners is switched off. And then we'll use this Select New option, press Offset, and we can see the offset vectors have been created and they are now selected. So let's close that down, and then we could just simply right click and use the option to group those objects. So now we should have 3 sets of vectors. We've got our offset for our 3D machining, we've got the vector boundaries that represent the flat areas for our 3D machining, and then we've got our profile cutout vectors. And so grouping these just makes it easier for me to select them when we come to create the toolpaths. So now ready to create the toolpaths, let's switch over to the Toolpaths tab. And so the next and most important thing to do before we create any toolpaths is to check over your material setup. So we use the Set option here. Material thickness we're working with is 1 inch. XY datum position, it is in the lower left hand corner. Then we have the Z0 position, which is currently set to the material surface or the top of the block. Now because we are working with 1 inch thick material, and remember we added in that 0.03 inch plane to stop us cutting through, I think my most important reference point is going to be from the machine bed. And so I'm going to make sure that I leave enough material for that plane to hold the part together. And so I'm going to set it from the bottom of the block or the machine bed. Let me move on to the rapid Z-gaps, ensuring that they're safe and appropriate, they're clear any clamping that we may have in place. And home and start position, Z-gap above the material 1.8 seems quite reasonable, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So the first toolpath we're going to look at doing is the 3D roughing toolpath. So I'm going to select the offset vectors that we grouped earlier. I'm going to hold down Shift and we're going to select the vectors that represent the flats. So we've got our boundary that we want to cut between, which is just the 3D parts of the slices, along with the the actual top slice also. So let's come over to the 3D roughing toolpath. The first thing we need to do is select a tool from the tool database. In this case, I am going to choose the 1/2 inch ball nose, and I'm going to use this for all roughing, finishing and cutout toolpaths. This will save me doing any tool changes here, and I'm going to be doing some hand finishing on this anyway. So we'll just check over the settings and press OK. To edit the settings for this particular toolpath, I'm going to use the edit option here, where here we could just look over the pass depth along with the step over. So I'm going to alter the pass depth. I think we can safely go up to 0.3 here, and then for the step over we're going to increase that to 40%. As we are doing a roughing pass here, I'm able to increase that. So I'll go ahead and press OK. Machine and limit boundary, well, we've got our vectors in place. We're going to make sure that the selected vectors option is selected there. Boundary offset of 0, we've already offset our vectors, so we don't need to input an offset there. Machine allowance, we'll just go with a very small value of 0.03 in there. Roughing strategy, we're going to Z-level rough that, and we're going to raster along the x-axis. And you give that a name, we'll just call that 3D roughing apple, and then we could just simply press calculate, and that's going to calculate that for us, and then we could go to preview that. Okay, so here I am going to be working with green foam, so I'd like to replicate that here in my preview. So if we go to this option here, I'm just going to go to the top and use a solid colour, and then I'm going to specify this green colour here, and then I could go and preview that toolpath to see how the roughing looks. So I'm happy with that. Let's just close that down, and we'll just tile our windows there. And so now with the vectors still selected, we're going to look at running a finishing pass. So with those selected, let's go into the 3D finishing toolpath. So here, as I said, we're going to use the same tool. So I'm going to use the select option here, and we're going to use the 1/2 inch ball nose. We could go ahead and press OK. Use the edit option, you can glance over the settings. Step over is appropriate for a finishing pass here, so I'm happy with that. We'll OK that. Machine limit boundary, again we've got our vectors selected here. We're going to cut this in a raster strategy, angle of 0 degrees, it's going to follow the x-axis, and then we'll give that a name, 3D finish apple, and then we can calculate that. And then again we could go and preview that toolpath. Okay, so if we just maximise the 3D view, and if I just take a look at the bottom there, you can see that I have a few artifacts here, and that's probably to do with the step over for the tool. That's not a problem here, as I am hand finishing this and I just want to cut this as quickly as possible. So let's just close out of the preview. I like what we've got there. Close that down. Again, let's go and tile our windows. And now we're going to run our profile pass to cut our slices out of our material. So let's just click on the vector that represents the outline. So you can see, because they're grouped, they're all highlighted there. And then we can go into the profile toolpath form. And so if we just zoom in there, you can see that it's pretty much just grazing through the material, and so it would require quite a big cleanup, but there is lots of methods to do this, but I wanted to show you this particular one as it's probably the most universally doable, yet as I've mentioned before, it requires a lot of hand finishing. And so that completes this tutorial on model slicing and toolpath setup. So let's go and save the file. So we'll go to File, Save As, and in the Slice in a 3D Model project folder, I'm going to call that one Slice in a 3D Model General Topics. Press Save, and you can access that from the project folder.